Hello, everyone. I'm Hülya. I work at the Flanders Architecture Institute as a curator, and I worked with this exhibition as found as a curator as well, together with Bie and Sofie. So welcome to the book launch of As Found, Experiments in Architecture. So the main part of this evening is actually a debate on how the existing structures carry potentials for a sustainable common future. But before that, I will take a few minutes to explain the book, on which I worked very happily together with my co-editors, Sofie and Bie. This is the book. It's published in English and in Dutch. The book actually follows the structure of the exhibition. I hope and guess that you have seen it. But also, a book is something a bit more permanent compared to an exhibition, so we added some parts to it. But mainly, the 7 experimental approaches make up the main body of the book. And this main body, as you can see, is wrapped up together with the introduction and the roundtable discussion at the very end. So the very beautiful graphic design of Caroline Wolewinski complemented our ideas on the book very nicely. So basically, after the introduction, we start with the 7 chapters dedicated to the 7 experimental approaches, which we also show in the exhibition. And these chapters are actually wrapped by these folds. I'm going to make a live show, because we are very proud of it. So each chapter actually starts with these folds. The initial idea was, of course, to have it really folding the whole chapter, but you have to kill your darlings when it comes to printing costs. And then the chapters continue with an article, but before that, maybe to explain a bit more on these folds, because we really wanted to show the references from all around the world. It was also the continuation of the idea of As Found. So, of course, we think that these contemporary projects from Belgium are experimental approaches, but we also know that they are also As Found experiments that have been realized in various geographies and time periods, mostly throughout the 20th century. So we wanted to show that our contemporary reflexes while we are dealing with the adaptive reuse are also As Found. So these references are visually placed in close relationship to each other and with short descriptions of each project. And after this kind of visual Wunderkammer, then we have articles that actually approach these 7 experiments we define. So maybe to make a quick list of these 7 experimental approaches, it's ensemble, void, reconfiguration, inside out, mirror, and nuance. And these are actually design methodologies that we kind of discovered through our curatorial work in the contemporary Belgian architecture. So one of our authors was Jonathan Hill, who we sadly lost at the end of last year. So maybe take this moment to say condolences to all his friends and family. And other than that, all these articles were written by both us, Sofie, Bie, and I, and together with some authors such as Christoph Grafe, Sally Stone, Konrad van Klempel. And they are providing these more theoretical frameworks, and in a way they have these kind of different voices which we also try to keep and not unite into one style. So it's more like to hear these different opinions on these experimental approaches. And then these experimental approaches are explained in through these 7 projects, actually 8, because Mirror is a double project. And here we follow the idea of the exhibition, where we actually wanted to focus on the design methodology, which meant we wanted to understand how architects worked during the design of all these projects. So it means we were showing these materials that they were working through their design processes. So the visuals are actually derived from the architect's resources, and these are the materials they actually looked at while they were busy designing these projects. And so the visual material is various in that sense. So it's pictures either of realized or in two of the projects in the construction phase. And then there are, of course, before images of projects. There are plans, there are diagrams. It's just like to understand how these processes have been going on through in these offices. And the book ends with a roundtable discussion that was joined by Stefan De Vylder, William Mann, 𝘍𝘕𝑚𝑒𝑔𝑎𝑛𝑐, Michiel van Bijlen, and Caroline Wood. And here we basically try to understand, as the title says, the challenges and promises of the S-Found. We both looked at architectural culture, mostly in Europe, how it has been developing over the invention of preservation, I would say, and how it's being practiced today in Flanders and Brussels. Before I leave the floor to the debate, to Sophie, Jan, Marie, Bie, and David, I just want to say very quick thanks. A lot of thanks to Barbara, who did the production of the book, and Eva, also did help with the production of the book and the exhibition, Petrus for very last minute readings and everything, and to all our authors, of course. Thanks again a lot to Caroline Welowinski for this beautiful design, and of course to the University of Hasselt for being such an amazing collaborator. So I would like to give the floor to Sophie and the debate team.
Good evening, everybody. Also from my part, very welcome. Thank you, Julia, for this introduction, and thank you, panelists, to accept our invitation. I will first introduce the panelists to the audience, and then we go into the discussion on the S-Found. So I will start with David Kohn, who traveled the farthest. David is founding partner of David Kohn Architects, the London-based practice, and they work internationally on arts, education, and residential projects. The office engages with research into carbon reduction, reuse, and the cultural context of projects. And there are many refurbishments projects on all scales in their portfolio. And maybe some of you know the work of David Kohn, because currently he's working here in Flanders in the beguinage of Hasselt, where together with Bovenbouw Architectuur, they work on the refurbishment of the existing beguinage into the Faculty of Architecture of the University of Hasselt. Next to me sits Marie Pirard. She's trained as an engineer and as an architect, and she used to work in Brussels as a practicing architect together with Agua. And there she was in charge of the Chapex project that you already saw on one of the pictures. It's a project that Agua does together with architect Jan De Vylder and Inge Vinck, who is also here present with Jan. And Marie now works on a PhD, and she's interested in the environmental reflexivity of modernist Belgian architects, and she studies how they react when they are confronted with environmental complications such as pollution, coal extraction, land use, and planning. Thank you, Marie, for being here. Then Jan, I slightly introduced already. Jan is partner with architect Jan De Vylder, Inge Vinck. And he also teaches at Zurich, and apparently he's most of the time in Zurich now, as we learned during the dinner we had. The work has been published and on show internationally, and in 2018, together with 𝘎𝘬𝘩𝘰𝘯𝘦𝘬𝘃 at the time, they won the Silver Line at the Venice Biennial. And the work of Jan, since in different constellations, has always deeply engaged with the existing. And it seems that reuse is a given, but we'll talk about that later. And also in the teaching studio in Zurich, there is a lot of attention for the existing, but also for questioning and rethinking some of the general assumptions in architecture. And then last but not least is Bie present. And Julia already mentioned that the three of us, we were co-curators and editors together of the publication. Bie is trained as an interior architect, but also holds a Master of Conservation and Monuments and Sites at the RLICC in Leuven. And she obtained a PhD on adaptive reuse. And also her current research focuses on adaptive reuse theory. She's an assistant professor at the University of Hasselt, and she widely publishes on adaptive reuse, both in Flanders and internationally. So in preparing this conversation, I structured it along some quotes that I found in the book that we made. And I will start with actually almost the first sentence of the book. It's this quote: "Arrange whatever pieces come your way." And we found it in a writer's diary by Virginia Woolf. And the first question is actually as simple as that. It's a question that I want to ask Bie, and I think it's important for the audience to understand the mindset that we had when making this book. Could you explain why we found this quote meaningful for the design attitude as found?
Thank you. Yes, so the quote starts with arranging, and when making a book about transforming existing buildings, we wanted not so much to highlight a restorative approach, but to highlight projects or to show projects where this aspect of arranging and rearranging was an important aspect in this design. So although there were definitely projects in the book where restoration of specific elements was a crucial element, for example, in its stain or the boekentoren, which were like monuments that needed a level of restoration. Also in these projects, this aspect of arranging and rearranging certain elements was absolutely necessary to make the building functional also today. And then the second part of the quote, whatever pieces come your way, that refers to that we were not only looking at heritage sites or protected sites, but also more modest buildings or sometimes buildings that were at first sight not even very beautiful, or in some projects even just fragments of existing of former buildings or pieces in the city. For example, the project the scenography by Ázla Číček in the Middelheim Park, which worked actually with rearranging of fragments. But I think this whatever comes your way is not only referring to the physical, tangible fabric, but also the memory and the history that the profession has. So in the book and also in the exhibition, we work a lot with reference projects also to show how the experiments that we want to illustrate with contemporary projects also, or going back and relying on ideas and practices that have been there for many years already.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And then, I would also turn this question to the practicing architect, so to say. What happens when comes your way, as Virginia Woolf says, is difficult. How do you deal with it? It's what happens if a size or an ambition of an existing project does not correspond to our current values? Are there ways in the practice of an architect how you can deal with it? Maybe, David, you can start.
Yeah, thank you. A beautiful book, by the way. And I think, obviously I'm here from London, so to some degree represent what's people are thinking there about what's happening here. And I think Belgian architecture is very, very influential in the UK at the moment, and probably the book and the exhibition are evidence of that, in that you wouldn't perhaps see that degree of investigation at the moment in the UK. So I think this is very much a context from which we can learn. But I think to your question about the difficulty of situations and how does a practicing architect react, I started my practice in 2007, and in London at the time, probably the debate was shifting towards urban projects, and particularly public space projects, and there were a lot of Europeans practicing in London then, more than there are now, unfortunately. And I would say the kind of working with context probably started having a lot of traction from an urban perspective. When you're working in urban situations with public space, you know you can't change a lot of the context. So you're looking to try and adapt in small ways what's around you. And I think in some ways that has gone on to inform architecture practice more broadly in the UK. And I see the influence of European practice being almost through urban practice into architectural practice. And I think probably what that, if you think about things at an urban scale rather than a building scale, maybe it is easier to always find something to work with. There is always more context the harder you look, and within that there's almost like an infinite possibility for how to adapt what is there. In a way, if it's the opposite of the tabula rasa, one can just explore whether it's the history or the use of a place, and within that find the means to generate new content. And often, I suppose that's what one learns from the urban situation, is it probably doesn't take a huge amount to make a very different public space. And I think that was probably how architecture in the UK has tried to do more with less.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, I think from a Flemish perspective, it's super interesting because in my impression and reading of our recent history of the past 20 years, maybe it's a bit the other way around, that we have such a weak urban planning system and weak legislation about public space, that it started maybe more with private interventions that took a kind of responsibility also for the public and tried to make a gesture that went beyond the commission of a smaller commission, a private commission. So it's interesting to see the difference. But to come back to Virginia Woolf, Marie, what is your idea about arrange whatever comes your way? What if what comes your way is not at all corresponding to our current values, that is both ecologically, in materials, but maybe also mentally, as Bie already mentioned?
Yes. First, I would like to say I find it a bit funny that we start with Virginia Woolf, because for me, I don't think that architects should dream about being alone in a room, like Virginia was. Okay. Also, I want to say that I was working for Agua, and I was a collaborator, also working with Jan about the project in Charleroi. So I think I'm grateful that Agua suggests to invite me, because it's about giving voice to the collaborators and also acknowledging the fact that building is always a collective work. In the team of architects, but also on the construction site with the workers, the contractors, the clients, the firemen, and many, many people. And I think it's quite important that we say that, and maybe we learn more to be in that position and to give visibility to that position, to be in the fray with the other actors. And yeah, maybe because it's a bit of my experience of being an architect like that, but I think it's maybe a way, I don't feel that, I feel that the metaphor of the author is a bit dangerous because it makes you feel like you're the only one to decide.
Okay.
And about the failures, I think that Chapex was full of failures from the beginning, because the building is too big, because the budget is too low, because the soil is polluted, the concrete is in a bad shape, because it's full of asbestos and everything. So yeah, I'm very happy that you asked this question, because it was a little bit also a situation we were confronted with, to work in a situation where you can say maybe there is nothing to do. And for me it was a very interesting situation in which I think I've learned another way of working, maybe being not going frontally, not having a frontal relation with the problems and trying to solve them, but trying to continue to have a creative or playful approach in the decision-making process. And actually, it contrasts a lot with what I thought I was supposed to do as an architect. I think that architects, we kind of optimistic people, or maybe smooth talker, always believing that the projects should solve everything and propose a win-win things, like everyone is gonna be happy, and yeah, we're gonna challenge all the issues together. And with this project, I realized it was not the case. And I think maybe we should avoid creating such narratives that make us think that everything is going well, because actually maybe it's counterproductive in the relation with our policy makers, because we still make the illusion that we can challenge everything, that everything is going well, and that we can continue the business as usual. So yeah, the failures were for me a very big discovery, and also maybe something we have to address as architects in the building of our narratives.
Okay. Jan, I'm looking at you now. Many things have already been said about the quote, but I'm curious to hear if you want to add something.
Well, I would not miss out in the line of bringing my appreciation to the book. I did that already in our pre-talk, Julia. What I believe is very good, very interesting in the book is that, like, for example, we talk about the void. I mean, that's architectural language. Let's skip the part where it's about preservation or reuse. We talk about what architecture is about. When we started, is it now 25 or 30 years ago? It must be 30 years ago, sorry for that, but we made things, and like the house 𝘎𝘕𝘦𝘯𝘕, and I cannot remember that we ever considered the word reuse, nor the word preservation. At that time, we were considering finances, budget, and context given. 1/3 of the budget was available to do something which was expected to be 1-to-1 and not 1/3. And that it happened to be in an existing building does not fade away that we were confronted with same issues in not given context. And I copy me in that sense that a little bit in the talk, or I mean not a little bit, I think we shared a talk on the fact that also when you look to Palais des Expositions in Charleroi, this is of course part of the idea of reuse, but at the same time not. It is especially a project in which indeed policies, strategies, working with budgets, economies, leads to certain ecologies, leads to certain ideas on reuse or how you can free something. And in that sense, I appreciate this idea that, like, when you look back to Palais des Expositions, the void, eminently, prominently there, but also is maybe the void into what the practice does. I recently more and more when I come in such a talks or circumstances, sometimes I like to bring it more back to the idea, but what's a practice? What do we do with that? So it's nice that it's appreciated in a discourse of reuse and ecology of the nowadays, but at the same time, it also has to do with some, like Marie came to say, the failures, I would say, the challenges. I've never in a certain way found any failure. They were always starting points, let's say. And I think that's something which maybe now can be made clear in existing context everyone knows, but it's also a new context in blanco sheets where we design buildings and so on. So the economy and how a practice works with that leads to that project that seemingly is appreciated in the realm of reuse. But before, I never used the word reuse, and it comes back. And secondly, what I like to add on it, to me, when I see now the gigantic flow into reuse, and that's really fine, good, cool to me, I'm always looking to many things and ask myself, but what could be the next reuse? And we seems to miss there still a kind of reflection modus in which we say, okay, what we gonna do? How can we do it in a way that eventually it might need or become something else? And these are not, to me, things that I thought ahead of when we were doing things, but they are things that we discovered by doing it. So like in Rotelenberg House, we understood we could dismount it while doing. We said, okay, children out of the house, actually now, maybe we can change the house. I think also in Palais des Expositions, 1/3 of the budget available only, again. I think we also took some decisions of which we could say they are reversible, or they could continue. Half of the building is climatized, the other half isn't. And I don't talk about the mid part, which is a park now. But even the mid part, which is a park, can be cladded with facades again, and there comes something else out of it. So to me, the discussion on this reuse is, I always try to balance it back to, we are architects, so I mean, we talk about architecture, we create places we want to be on one hand, and on the other hand, what we do, how much do we really understand reuse, and do we prepare for the next reuse? And that's why we now Google in our studios with the words like reenactment or rehearsal, as kind of thinkings to change a little bit the reuse word into an act of twisting it around. We are not the end point. That's, I think, the most important thing in reuse, I would say, is now the issue. Are we the end point of what we do?
Mm-hmm. So if I listen carefully, I hear a plea for accepting that we are just a face and that the building survives.
We are in between,
yes,
an interact.
The building survives us, and we give it to the next generation. Okay, thank you. So, it's another quote that I have here, but it's okay. We are flexible. Architecture is a time machine. This is a quote by our deplored colleague, Jonathan Hill. And it's actually a bit about what Jan says now, so it's good that the technology was smarter than we thought and gave us this quote. What if we look at buildings as a gift from our ancestors, as a message through time? If you start looking at buildings like this, then demolishing a building is actually a very harsh position to take, because then you stop the communication that comes from a former generation. In a way, you could say that. If you think this through, it has far-reaching consequences. Maybe then the focus is not on perfection anymore, and it's already been suggested by two of the speakers, but the focus might lie on other values. And what could these values be? Could they be on immaterial values, or do architects only have to take into account material aspects of the world we live in? And what, if we look at it like that, would it lead to a more holistic approach in history? Would we also accept things that in a way are controversial now? Exploitation, patriarchism, that is part of our history. Should we also have to deal in a more active way with these immaterial values that all the buildings are carrying? So Bie, again, I would like to start with you. What is your opinion on this, and especially in the perspective of some of the projects that we selected? Chapex is already there, and it shows, maybe the self-estimation of a city at a moment where maybe other social investment would be more acquired, question mark, or Mortsel, a symbol of a very conservative post-war moment in Flemish history. So what is your idea about all these immaterial aspects that come with the messages these buildings carry?
I think that many of the buildings that we selected for the book and the exhibition have a very strong social impact, and also took into account the social values of the site and the context in which they were working. You already pointed out the Mortsel project by Eagles of Architecture, where the shell of the building was preserved, definitely not for its great architectural quality. I think it's fair to say that some people might find the building shell even ugly, or found it like that before. But the reason why Eagles of Architecture decided to preserve that building shell was because it was the city hall of Mortsel for the people living there, and it was so strongly linked to the local identity and sense of place that it made sense to just preserve these facades, but then do an intervention to make it more beautiful, and also comment on the meanings that were in the iconography of the building. A smaller project that is also in the book is the Malibran Youth House in Brussels by Carton 123. And there, when we had the conversations about the project and how the project was developed, it was so great to also hear that what was actually part of the narrative was, or part of the as found, was not only the material fabric of the site, but mostly the community that was there, how people were already using, or especially the young people were already using the site, and the spaces around the site and the streets, and how that informed the program, but also the design of the project. And I think it's a very clear example of how immaterial elements and social values are as much part of the as found than the material aspects.
Okay, thank you. And Marie, it made me think of your PhD. I'm not so much aware of what it's really about, but you work on Belgian modernist architects. And my statement that maybe a building is a message from a former generation to us. How do you look at that? Do you think it's a workable hypothesis, or is it problematic?
I think in the case of Chapex, if it's a gift or a message, it's kind of a toxic one also. Does it mean that we have to be grateful from that heritage? Because I still like this building a lot, but a lot of materials and energy and human force has been taken to build it, and now we receive it with all these troubles. And I don't know, I don't feel that of course there is a cultural things about every buildings, and this one as well. In the case of Charleroi, it's mainly also like Malibran, a kind of collective memory. Every person I've met on the construction site, most of them, they were from the neighborhood, they all had a story to tell about the building. They lived something inside that. And for me, it was the most important, more than, I don't know, the memory of the big man that has decided one day to build this very, very huge building in the city center. I mean, I don't know what can we do with that. So, I mean, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jan, you also worked in that building, but you also worked in many other places with different immaterial values. How do you work with that? Or do you neglect it?
No, I think the immaterial value is where it in fact starts always. Okay. So I can put things on a line in that sense. Start again with the Rotelenberg house, which was in fact a family heritage at all, long stories in it. Everything comes together in it, in a small little village where everyone is family. And there is a whole story to tell about. So I think with Peter and Ellen, the Sunday afternoon building site meetings in which we directed every month, one weekend, everything together, it's all about the immaterial value of things and people working and doing things together. If I pass by the psychiatric clinic, which is in architecture realms heavily appreciated because of the architecture of it. To me, this is still much more a project which is about being as an architect backed again, coming into a realm of working with people living there, what they call patients, but I try to refuse that, and trying to find a way to get things done. To accept that at a certain moment when we as architects love the green column and the white and the this and that someone says, I've lived here 3 months and I'm happy to say that this building is a symbol to me, namely like we were given up in society and someone takes care of us, someone took care of a given up building and let the traces see we all take with us. I have to say this is quite a strange experience to hear that, because as an architect, you're not trained in accepting such kind of emotional talks. We are emotional persons already when we talk about architecture, but we seem to miss somewhere a capacity. I tell this here and you think, well, yeah, okay, what can we do with that talking about architecture? But finally, it's about that the building is deteriorating and all. That's not the issue. The issue is that how you can do something where normally a green grass field would come in place. Decay, delay, work, search still today how to use the building and so on. And I think this is also what is up now into Charleroi coming. Honestly, I was there Monday and I asked myself, and I asked there were people of the cabinet of the mayor and the bouwmeester and how will we move on, and no answer. Of course they are on it, but what it does also is, I think, a little bit, I have a good understanding of what you see, Marie, and I like it what you say. It's not about the architect who made it, and it's not about us. It will be about the ones who use it and how they're going to use it, that build up that memory of that building, or not the memory, the living memory, or they will build the future memory of that building. And it will come. I mean, one can say a lot about the project, but at the end it has been realized, I go back to practice, for 1/3 of the money available and the demolishing or giving it to the economical or to the capitalist market to make lofts out of it or something like this, or high-valued offices or whatever, was the alternative. So maybe there still it has to come, but in fact what we do is only for that. We do it to make places where life can take place. But we are architects and we are gifted or not in creating forms for that coming home. Mm-hmm. And I do think in Charleroi it is a chance to come home with all kind in the near future, once the programmation and so will start to that. I'd like to add one. I also I had to talk with Bart this week on a total other project I'm guiding on how to construct a practice, and
you mean, sorry to interrupt, with Bart Hollanders, the architect?
Eagles of Architecture.
Eagles of Architecture.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
sorry, he's an old friend. So Bart, I don't know if you're here. Raise your voice, it's a loud voice. Yes. And what was nice also when we talked about it is, when we see the project now, it's still under construction for a long time. So talking about people, building processes are also guided not only by architects, but a lot of study companies, the politics, the functionaries, everyone is involved. Budgets also, I think, Charleroi, you could have done in half the time. No, the money came by bits and pieces. Also, I think this is part, not exactly, my story is not totally true, but part of what I can see in that project. And what is their important component also is then how an architect builds up its practice around such a circumstance. I think Marie also said it to Palais des Expositions. We needed to shift minds in doing it. I remember me vividly. One day we were making windows and everything was planned to be slick and nicely detailed, and we discussed, let's not do it. Let's not do it. We can't do it. There is no money. There is no that. Yeah, but we're all educated like that, etc. And I mean, so it's on the scale of the ones who will use it, who live it, who were your commissioners, your clients, your inhabitants, but it's also on the scale of how we work as architects. All these things like 𝘎𝘕𝘦𝘯𝘕, to me, need other ways of production, need other ways of approach. And the only way is that you sit down and bring a human scale of thinking back in how do we make things. It's like being crazy about craftsmanship. Okay, the economy of people working on a building site is different. It's not anymore about ultimate craftsmanship. So what you see in these projects, often here present, is because it deals also with a human capacity of making the things as we can make them nowadays.
Mm-hmm. David, I'll come back to you, but first I want to add on to what Jan is saying. What Jan is saying is this for you, the definition of why we choose as a title experiments in conservation, because of this backward, forwards, difficult processes. It's an open question.
Yes, so we had this as a subtitle, Experiments in Conservation. With that, or in Preservation, with the title, we also wanted to refer to the book of 𝘎𝘰𝘯𝘦𝘯𝘕, and there were several other authors involved in that book, which is like shows a very interesting parallels also to other disciplines. What we in this book tried to do was to show architectural experiments, so we really focused on buildings. But I think this experimental approach and this being open for changes also during the constructions and also revisions of the design process based on what you find once the building is in continuation is definitely something that was seen. The more we were investigating the projects, the more that actually became clear that the design process and sometimes also results were very unpredictable sometimes. Mm-hmm. For example, in the 𝘍𝘕𝘦𝘯𝘕 library in Mechelen, the way that their different layers of the interior finishings were preserved alongside one another. This is something that is very difficult to design beforehand. It's really on site by trying, and then the end result is what you get on the side. So yes, I think definitely this experimental approach is something that as an architect you should be open for in this context of working with existing buildings.
Mm-hmm. David, I have two questions now for you. The first one relates to this experimental aspect. You based in London, but also working in Flanders. Do you notice a similar openness, let's say, in the architectural community and maybe also in commissioners for experiments, or not in those two geographies?
Yeah, I mean, when I was on site yesterday in Hasselt with Bovenbouw, looking at the Beguinage, and I think what I would say is that I have the feeling, and I might be wrong because this is the first project I've been involved with on site, is that there is a more relaxed attitude to building in Flanders, in Belgium, in that contractually in the UK, there's a lot of, the majority of the focus of construction projects is on contractors who subcontract. And that dominates how a lot of construction is delivered. So it's highly contractual, it's highly procedural. The relationship between makers and architects is quite stretched. And I would say a lot of effort in the UK for a practice like ours is to try and close that gap and to try and create opportunities to talk to subcontractors in a creative way rather than through the mechanism of the main contractor. And if yesterday's experience was anything to go by, it doesn't feel quite so distant. The presence of the main contractor in Belgian architecture, my sense is, maybe it's on this type of job, is less pronounced. Yeah. That would be, so.
Okay.
What does that mean for experiments? It probably means that it's much more likely that you could make changes in a design process later in Belgium, possibly than in the UK, because in the UK it's tending towards all of the risk goes to the contractor, so you have to finish the design, hand it over, and then you're just trying to kind of contractually assess whether they've delivered what you started.
Okay, well,
There's a kind of there's a constant effort to distance design from making, even though a lot of practitioners would accept that the best results would come from bringing those relationships together. And I would say the work in the show, which is predominantly from here, does feel more experimental in the framework of conservation than projects that you would find in the UK. I think that's probably why Belgian architecture is of great interest outside of Belgium at the moment. So there's definitely. I think it's an interesting question. How could you increase experimentation, say in the UK, and what kind of example could Belgian practice set? I mean, I do know that the British are very unwelcoming. There are not very many Belgian practices that get the opportunity to work in the UK, and I always feel
I know.
Yeah, I feel some.
I facilitated many, but
Yeah, I feel some shame that I'm so welcome here, and I have colleagues that are very accommodating of this, and I can't reciprocate. So there's something that is a problem, and probably it means that the influence is more through education. I think there's more conversation between teachers in the UK than is allowed to be through practitioners, because there just isn't the possibility. I was saying earlier that the Bouwmeester. I mean, I'm sure everyone here realises it's extraordinary, but from a UK perspective, it's just really like another planet. It's just unbelievable that so many young, ambitious architects should be given opportunities to build ordinary buildings. That just does not happen in the UK. And in a way, that does make Belgian architecture very exemplary in taking certain kinds of risk. It may not feel, I don't know how risk-taking it feels, but from a British perspective, it does feel that way.
I'd like to a little bit interfere on it, because, well, I'm not recently, for a while in mode is always to say, is it true or is it? Question, is it? Like experimental, is it? I folded back to that point that I think, well, thanks, it's perceived as experimental, and in a certain way there is an experiment around, but it's maybe not the experiment, just a daily habit of an architectural practice trying to find ways with things, going back to the first quote, the things as they come along, and you have to arrange them again. And that can be named experimental, but not per se needs to be named experimental, because if I fold it back to what a practice does, what we do as practitioners, it's a very quiet energy investments in keep on going with the things as they appear. And as they appear, you can neglect them and say, no, this was decided, so you do it. But if you have then a feeling that maybe it would be in everyone's interest, from budget to outcome to sustainability about it, that then you say, I am prepared to go with that. I go with that. And I see that more as an just a simple daily, everyday attitude, than to say we are experimenting. But finally, one could say, yeah, that's an experiment. I totally agree. But I'm always with this, is it reuse? Is it reuse? Yeah, no, because we lock it down as never to be reused again. Is it experimental? Yeah, but watch out, we are in that field of movements. And I don't think that in that sense, but I've never worked in England, as I told you, that in that sense, but I'm now learning to understand other realms of working outside of Belgium also. And in a certain way, having not worked in England, I can say in all the other realms in Europe, or outside, inside, outside Europe, naming Switzerland, I mean, it is not that particularly there is more freedom here, honestly. I think that it's more particularly a matter of attitude of keep on going with things. Because in a certain way, even practices here have less means to experiment, where other practices have more means to experiment and less is experimented. From the pure viewpoint, what is experiment? And so I'm puzzled with that. So I'm quite calm in this. I appreciate people say, yeah, work is experimental. Thank you. But I think I say my work is daily. I have to work on that every day.
If I could just come back on one aspect of what you said.
Yes.
I think what's interesting that you mentioned Switzerland, because probably prior to Belgium, like many other countries...
I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, but the influence of Swiss practice was huge in the UK. And of course, to caricature Swiss practice of 20 years ago, it was about precision, it was about singular ideas being carried through to the conclusion of a project. And the architects who emulated Swiss practice in the UK, Caruso St. John, Sergeant Bates, they were very successful in importing certain ideas. And I suppose in that context, you know, there's a certain kind of psychopathology of being able to let go of that, I think is necessary, timely, and requires some courage, even if, in fact, it's just a consequence of context. I think what you're saying is you're reacting to the conditions that you find, but the conditions that you're reacting to are probably the present and future conditions, and the previous, say, Swiss model was about an economy and an idea about how to make things, which is, you know, was probably never achievable in the UK, or barely. There are a few moments, and, you know, requires an economy like Switzerland to sustain it. So in a way, it becomes more relevant to be looking at an everyday Belgian practice than some kind of Swiss perfect model.
I don't know if it's perfect. We had the opportunity to visit Jan and also the studio of Anne. And in terms of adaptive reuse, there's a lot of demolition still of good buildings. Anyways, but that's another condition. They work in other conditions, also economically. But let's go to the final quote and we'll see what the computer gives us. Okay, so we go to Richard Sennett. He says that sustainable and livable cities are cities that can be repaired. And in the book that we made, we actually looked at this repair as a specific kind of care attitude, caring for things and preparing them. And we noticed that 20 years ago, this approach of care was especially present in conservation, restoration, in actually the heritage field, and that more avant-gardistic or experimental, to use the word again, culturally oriented offices were also dealing with the existing in another way and caring and repairing for them, while now we see a shift that actually also in policy making, it's becoming more and more important, and this discourse is becoming more mainstream. And we even noticed that, for example, the Declaration of Davos, it's a hugely economic pressure behind it in 2018, also stated that taking care of what's already there, taking care of cultural heritage is also important. And now my question is to practitioners, what is the effect of these beautiful statements? Is this real? Because at the same time, we also know that the building industry is responsible for 40% of CO2 emissions. And we also know that if we would stop demolishing and build fast, if we would stop that process, we could easily reduce that with 50%. I know this from Arno Ham. Yeah, he's very active on this. But anyways, so my question is, all this wording, is it greenwashing, or do you really notice an effect in the practice, in how commissioners make a brief, in how contractors are open towards another approach?
Well, I'm sorry.
Marie.
Yeah, I just wanted to also reflect on what you said before, that maybe we're lucky in Belgium because there are many experiments. And I was asking the question, but why do we do experiments? It's not just because it's funny. I think there is a sense of emergency now that is rising in the field of architecture, and also the acknowledgement of the impact we have in the industry sector. And for me, I don't feel that saying that we're gonna renovate rather than demolish is enough, because we're not gonna avoid profit seeking, we're not gonna avoid speculation, and we're not gonna avoid gentrification only by saying we're gonna renovate, even with the most beautiful experiments you can imagine. So yeah, I really think there are some political action that has to be started.
Okay. David, what is your experience?
I just finished for the first time extending my own house, and I was determined to see it as an exemplar of reuse. And there was a network that was operating in the UK that was EU funded, that was looking for benchmark projects. And so we started out with the assumption that everything in the house would be something that had come from somewhere else. But what became clear was that there were very few contractors in London who were prepared to work like that. And the few that there were charged a huge premium, and those that weren't, if you were trying to kind of coax them into this becoming their way of working, it would put a huge amount of effort on the architect. So for example, you would have to go to every salvage yard, you would have to source the materials yourself. So in the end, the project is probably quite conventional in terms of levels of reuse. And I would say what I learned was that yes, there absolutely has to be government intervention and a huge amount of education. I mean, the one thing I'm very aware of is that talking to architects in schools particularly about how to address these issues is really probably a waste of time. And that education needs to be, I mean, this to go back to your point about collaboration, I think it needs to be completely industry-wide, and I think students of architecture need to know where other people are learning about sourcing materials, construction. They all need to know where each other are from a very young age and be talking about what they're going to do about it, because otherwise a few architects doing a few interesting things where they invest far more time and money than is actually available to do the work is not going to change the dial on anything. It's going to make a very few kind of standout projects and an industry that continues to produce 40% of the kind of carbon.
Do you want to add something, Jan?
Yeah, many things have been said. I would like to add many things, but I'd like to... I think, first of all, we just have to admit that the whole discussion on where we have to change things and where then the things are changing, they only change when there is an economical interest. Sorry. I mean, all idealizations. And for example, I think now the huge issue on not demolishing and reusing has a kind of self-built-in contradiction, because the fact that it becomes under such an attention, it only becomes market value. And again, you risk to arrive in the same market value condition when there was no reuse. So the fact that everyone wants to reuse buildings right now is because there is a capitalist click in we can value it. I remember in the first projects we ever did, we were collecting old windows from old buildings they were demolishing, and we asked, can we have the windows? They said, oh, you can have it. If you want to have now an old building, a window from an old building, you have to go to a recycling market and they say, this one, it's now valued this price. And it's not wrong as such, but we have to take note of it, that maybe by, and in architecture today, and especially at my school also, these discussions are so not demolishing, yes, no, this, that, yeah, fix the office and practice and here and there, and you can't stop anymore with shouting everything. But at the end, we are not anymore at the table of trying to shift and to change the things. And we seems to almost there follow the market. To say like, please shout, you cannot demolish anymore, because then all the things we have become another value and we can move on with it. I mean, it's not only this what I come to say about it, but it's also this about it. So I'm always, when I hear all this very, I say, okay, maybe it's half fancy and it's half true. And then maybe it's another half, which is 150% by the end, dangerous. The way we are setting this now into the market. And it's a concern. It doesn't stop me also reuse. It doesn't stop me also advocate to not demolish and so on. But I need that critical quote to it, because otherwise we risk to just have been the next tendency. And sooner or later we end up in a postmodernism, and the fact like we didn't know anymore what to do to say else. And then we create some forms. I mean, so this is, I think, it's at the urge of the time. It has to go now quick. But also on the other time, the reflection is very much needed, because as I told you, I mean, I see in a production of reuse today, 75% of the things becoming something you will never be able to reuse anymore. Never. Sure? And that's a little bit where I'm always, that keeps me awake at night. No, other things, but I mean, that would be like, okay, how can we exactly go with that?
Yeah, okay.
I like to add one more note on it. I had a nice discussion a couple of months ago, also in Zurich with 8,000 agency, and SEA was also there. That's the Norm Institute in Switzerland, like we know NBN, and you know, what do you have in London? This Norm Institute, how it's named? Norm Institute. Yeah, that regulates. You don't have it?
Yeah,
wow.
they probably
Anyway,
have many.
and the discussion at the end was that they said to SEI, there was a public question saying, the norms are all for new build, which is also the problem in the reuse, and they ask how will SEI will get along with it in the future, as this is now coming on the agenda in Switzerland. And the former president of SEI said, well, actually, I'm very doubtful if we should design norms for rebuild. We should design platforms for discussion. The norm is not anymore applicable, even for the regular. It's getting so complicated that in fact you should create how to do a city that not new. But the idea that norms should be brought into this, I found that quite brave, interesting, but I do believe it's true. The reuses, and that's affected by thinking which is not about reuse, by which it results in fact in the new use, however it was reused.
Okay, thank you
Building
very much. And I look into the audience. I don't know if there are questions for all of us or reflections that you want to share. Oh, there you are. I don't see any hands. Yes, there is one from Barbara. Is there a mic? Otherwise, I can repeat it so everybody hears you.
No, I would like to come back on what Mr. De Vylder suggested about redefining or considering to strong idea. And what I wanted to say is that what I feel in the Flemish situation, as it is outlined in the book, in the 7 projects, that one of the basic ideas or realities, which is not discussed as such, is that the reuse always starts from hard material, from stone. So the built environment is very solid. And what I want to say about that is that I was in Paris last week and I saw the exhibition of Jane from Mumbai Studio, and it made me connect with this idea of entr'acte and pause, because there the architectural forms which are suggested, they are intrinsically made out of natural materials. But maybe it's a contradictio in terminis to long for a reuse of those materials here because of our climate, because we don't reuse wooden houses because we don't have any. So this is the first thing I wanted to remark. Maybe it's out of question, I don't know. The second thing is that what I saw there is that you have these proposals which are merging, because I think that he's also doing reuse, but in a very, very different way with this practice, that you feel a kind of merging between architecture as such and interior architecture. So he's on the edge of art, design, and architecture. And reuse here could maybe also be injecting our métier de l'art. But maybe that's also a contradiction in terms, because maybe we don't have them anymore. Because you know, he is working with the artisans from India who make all these popular folk art objects, which he then injects in the environment, and in these architectures, but which are very much linked to this idea of transitory ways of dealing with built space. So that
Yeah, I'd like to give a little response to that. Bijoy is a good friend, and of course we could discuss a lot of other things about what he's doing anyway, but what I like what you bring is, the question also is to do, what can we produce in architecture today that should not long, that should not stand, that should stay only momentary, temporary. I think this is also something in this idea of entr'acte or rehearsal or reenactment, understanding that you are an in-between. This is not dystopic, this is not negative, but also I think I look to the children, to my children, and I ask where can I keep the things free for them? This is a very philosophical attitude which we maybe not daily in practice are with, but in a certain way I do believe that what you name hard material is also mental hard material, namely the idea that we always should deliver and prepare and make ready for the next one. It's contradictory, you could say, to what I came to say, we should prepare it, but there is also a point, I think, that the temporary is as important as the entr'acte or the rehearsal of things. So where can we introduce things that maybe might fade away? Why not? They might fade away. And that's important, I think, in architecture at the moment. Where can we make the things so they can fade away or they can be taken away and they become light? And I think in that sense, the interpretation on Bijoy's work I really appreciate on behalf of other comments, but I do think it's that ephemeral which is in it, which is important, as also that he is on search, and that I think is almost the most important, to bring the architecture designing, making, back to the distance of an arm length of personal capacity doing it. Comments I have also on it, but I mean, this is a little bit where I would say he is a good counterpoint to that point of where one say, don't produce anymore. And if you, so he produces only. And it's also reuse and everything, but I don't think he wants to talk too much about the aspect of reuse. He wants to talk about the human value he brings to things. And I think this is a very important connotation when we talk in the architecture of practice of reuse, namely, next to the built value, what is the human value and how can we open it to futures and not just making it today. Today we have to reuse it all, point. And what's then the next day, please?
Okay, that's a good question to end the night, I think, unless there are urgent questions. Yes.
I have a small question, which maybe is more for Bie and Sofie in relation to the last topic.
Yes.
About the scenography and the temporary setting that you constructed as well. How do you relate it to the publication? Because it's actually you've produced the book, but you've also constructed a temporary exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you bring that back to what is just discussed about a temporary construction you've made and where it will go next or will not go next?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for your question. I think concerning the exhibition, so what we found really important is that also the exhibition is as found, so there is no post-production whatsoever in the exhibition, so everything is or from the basement, from the single, or as you saw from what was already in the exhibition hall. And then in relation to the book, actually an exhibition is very ephemeral and has a very short time span and also and can only live further in the heads of the people who visited it and also in some pictures. And that's very different from, of course, a catalog where, we hope that people who are intrigued by some of the text or some of the analyses, that they not just go back to it because they've seen the exhibition, but also maybe they want to read things about things and reread some of the text, and maybe in 10 years, if you reread, you have a totally different interpretation. So that's the idea that we had with the book. But maybe Bie, you want to add?
It's maybe to add, so there is on the one hand the scenography by Veld, which really worked with the material reuse of what was already in the single, but I think also how we try to conceive the curatorial aspect of how to present the projects. We didn't choose like to have one photographer visiting all the buildings or present consistent plans, but we really wanted to show also the design process and the process of analysis that was there for each of the buildings, which turned out to be very different depending on the brief and the site which there was. And therefore also the material which is present in the book is not produced, like the drawings are not produced for the book, but they are as we found them in the archives of the architectural offices. So in that sense, I think this idea of as found of the setup is also in a way present in the book, or at least that's what we try to incorporate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if the exhibition is still open now. Yes, it's still open, so you can visit. This is everything you missed. Sorry, Julia, it's not going. There it is. Okay, I just wanted to show some of our future projects, but no, sorry, I'm really bad with this. Oh, there it is. Okay, but what's mainly interesting is that we, in design studios, in 4 design studios in architectural schools in Flanders and Brussels, we did a studio on As Found, and there will be a student exhibitions the last 2 weeks of, so the 2 weeks from 5 till 17 of March, there will be the Atelier As Found in the corridors of the single student exhibitions that also reflect on the As Found. And there will be a finissage by Emily Wickham of Assemble, the London-based collective that also work a lot with immaterial values and with communities and see architecture as a collective practice. And in between, you're, of course, very welcome also to the lectures and the family day that we organize on the 25th of February. Thank you for being here tonight, and go home safely.